The year is 1202. The ambassador of the Rum Sultanate bursts into the throne room in Tbilisi with an ultimatum that was meant to change the map of the Caucasus forever. His master, Sultan Rukn ad-Din Suleiman Shah, was brief and merciless. Your king is a woman, which means she is weak. Let her accept Islam and become my wife, and if she refuses, she will become my concubine. In that era, such words meant the inevitable destruction of the state, but the reaction of the Georgian court was unexpected. One of Tamara's commanders, unable to contain his outrage, struck the envoy in the face so hard that he lost consciousness. Tamara herself, maintaining an icy calm, ordered the banners to be raised. Welcome to the Amazing History Channel, and today we will ask the question, how did a small Christian kingdom, surrounded by hostile empires, manage to reach its peak, its power, under the leadership of a woman who was officially called not a queen, but a king? You are about to get a real look at the biography of a person whose genius was in the ability to turn weakness into overwhelming strength. We will separate the holy legend from the real political pragmatist, who masterfully waged hybrid wars hundreds of years before that term even appeared in textbooks. Before I begin, I want to give the traditional thanks to our viewers, and especially to the channel's sponsors for their support. Thank you for being with us. Well, I won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's get to the topic of the video. To get a sense of the scale of the story, let's first imagine the geography. Georgia lies on the southern slopes of the Caucasus, where the mountains both protect and limit. To the north, there are mountain passes and steppe worlds. To the south, major Muslim powers. To the west, the Black Sea and Byzantine politics. And to the east, roads to the Caspian Sea. And further on to Iran and the inner regions of Asia. The 12th century was a time of strict patriarchy, where a woman on the throne was seen as an anomaly. George III of Georgia understood this better than anyone. He had no male heirs, and to prevent a civil war, he took an unprecedented step. He crowned his daughter Tamar while he was still alive, when she was only about 12 years old. This was an attempt to secure the future. As long as her father was alive, Tamar was a co-ruler, recognized, but still shielded by the authority of the male monarch. But when George died in 1184, the aristocracy immediately saw the young ruler as easy prey. The throne that Tamar inherited was a throne of compromises. She was forced to be crowned again to confirm her legitimacy in the face of rebellious clans like the Orbeliani. The nobility demanded privileges. The church wanted influence. They expected obedience from her, but Tamar began her own chess game. It was at that time that her title became official in the documents. Mepe means king, and in the Georgian language this word is masculine. That is, she was not a queen, the wife of a king, nor a king's widow, but the king herself. This is not a linguistic coincidence. This is where a fundamental detail lies. Moreover, the official title of Georgian kings was Mepet Mepe, King of Kings. In the 12th century, titles meant everything. And if she was called a king, it meant her power was presented as the power of a male, sovereign, supreme ruler, without any concessions for her gender. But a title is just a word, even if it sounds like king. Real power in 12th century Georgia passed not only through the throne, but also through the altar. The Orthodox Church held significant influence. Monasteries owned lands, bishops controlled cities, and the Catholicos Patriarch could influence decisions just as much as any prince. And here Tamara makes her second move. She convenes a church council. Some bishops are removed, some are transferred far away, and some lose their influence, but they couldn't remove the Patriarch because of strong resistance from the clergy. Tamara's great-grandfather, David the Builder, never stood on ceremony with his opponents. They died quickly and not always of natural causes. Tamara, on the other hand, preferred a different style, without executions or severed limbs, which by the standards of the 12th century was a bit milder. She understood that cruelty breeds revenge, especially among the hot-blooded Highlanders. That's why she established control through appointments, quietly removing undesirable people. They seemed to remain alive, but they were no longer dangerous. Thanks to this, the church eventually ended up on her side, and that meant that now any of her political moves became almost sacred. Now war is the defense of faith. Disobedience is almost a sin, and victory is a sign of heavenly support. But in medieval society, political legitimacy alone was not enough. An heir was needed, which meant a husband was needed too. For the medieval world, an unmarried woman on the throne was a dangerous precedent. Therefore, the court circle, led by her aunt Rusudan, chose a husband for her. They found a candidate far away, in Rus. Yuri, son of Andrei Bogolyubsky and grandson of Yuri Dolgoruki, shared their faith, was a brilliant warrior, and very handsome. After his father's murder, Yuri ended up in exile, wandering through the lands near the Black Sea and basically living without support, a convenient option for the Georgian court. But reality turned out to be less rosy. At first, everything really looked pretty good. Yuri took part in campaigns, expanded borders, and captured cities. The problem started later. According to the chronicles, Yuri increasingly held lavish feasts, abused wine, and behaved provocatively. Of course, this could be attributed to the traditional medieval exaggeration. They say that when a ruler falls, he is always portrayed as a moral degenerate. But it wasn't just about drunkenness. The main conflict was political. Yuri gradually began to act not as the queen's husband, but as an independent ruler. In a society where the husband was considered the natural head of the family, this seemed logical, but Mepe was already on the throne, and Tamara had no intention of sharing power. After enduring 2 years of her husband's behavior, Tamara initiated a divorce. And in the 12th century, just so you understand, in an Orthodox Christian kingdom, this was unthinkable. But she accused her husband of sodomy and other indecencies, and she managed to convince the churchmen to annul their marriage. Yuri was sent to Constantinople with rich gifts, but medieval politics doesn't go well with generosity, especially when the insulted prince is still alive and has military experience. In a year, Yuri will return not as a husband, but as a contender for the throne. At that time, Byzantium was a kind of mercenary market. If you had money, you could always find an army, and Yuri had money. Those very gifts with which he was so generously sent away from Georgia. So, Yuri gathers an army and returns. Some of the nobility support him, and that means there was still a faction in the country dissatisfied with a woman on the throne. Yuri captures Kutaisi, and his supporters proclaim him king. At some point, Georgia is effectively split. But Tamara was not the kind to back down. She brings out her troops. Yuri is defeated and taken prisoner. Anyone else in her place would have cut off his head long ago and been done with it. But Tamara forgives her ex-husband again and lets him go. And do you think this taught him anything? No. After some time, Yuri will try again. He'll try to seize power. He'll gather supporters again. And he'll be defeated again. And what happened to him after that? History is silent. But mercy aside, the state still needed someone to wield the sword. After the story with Yuri, Tamara could no longer afford to make a mistake, and she chooses her husband herself. Her chosen one is the Ossetian prince David Soslan, a childhood friend and loyal ally, and her second marriage became the key to her imperial greatness. David did not claim the throne. He did not try to become king instead of the king. He became exactly who he was supposed to be in the system Tamara had built, a military leader. Meanwhile, Tamara finishes restructuring the elite, with her supporters taking key positions. And the regional rulers become dependent on the center. While Tamara was engaged in diplomacy and internal reforms, David was reforming the army. The country was split into 9 military districts, and constant training was implemented. And this was, by the way, not a shaky confederation of mountain princes, but a centralized state. Tamara and David have children. First a son, George, then a daughter, Rusudan. Now the question of succession was settled. The dynasty continued. Georgia now had not just a female ruler, but a stable ruling couple with clearly defined roles. But when the internal system became stable, Tamara moved on to what was considered the main indicator of strength in medieval politics, war on foreign territory. By that time, the Seljuk Empire had already broken up into separate sultanates, Iran, Azerbaijan, and Asia Minor. Everything was in a state of constant conflict. This was that very historical moment, and Georgia began to act. In 1195, the Battle of Shamkor took place. The opponent was the Atabeg of Azerbaijan, one of the strongest Muslim rulers in the region. The army of David Soslan defeated his forces. In Georgian sources, this is described almost as a miracle. Huge spoils, prisoners, and the banners of the defeated enemy. But the main thing was not the trophies, but the psychological effect. Georgia showed that it was capable of striking beyond its own borders. A few years later, conflict flares up with the Rum Sultanate, the Seljuk state in Asia Minor. And here comes the famous story with the Sultan's letter, which I already mentioned at the very beginning of the video. The Georgian version says the Sultan gave Tamara two choices: convert to Islam and marry him, or stay Christian and join his harem. It's possible this story was embellished by chroniclers, but the reaction was quite real. The answer was war. The Battle of Bassiani in 1202 became the culmination of her reign. Sultan Rukn ad-Din gathered forces from across the Islamic world, including troops from distant India. Tamara, as usual, addressed the army with a speech that, they say, made the warriors forget their fear in the face of an enemy 10 times their number. During the battle, the tactical genius of David Soslan and the fanatical devotion of the troops to Tamara led to the complete defeat of the Seljuks. The Sultan fled, and his banner was brought to the feet of the woman he wanted to make his concubine. Georgia reaches the peak of its influence. Its borders are expanded. Territories as far as northern Persia pay tribute. And the princes of neighboring lands prefer alliance over confrontation. It is at this moment that Tamara's reign begins. This period is called the Golden Age. But the problem with medieval victories is that they quickly create an illusion of invulnerability. After Shamkor and Bassiani, the Georgian troops felt like they were in control. Their campaigns pushed further and further south. The borders expanded from Dantikli to Tbilisi. It seemed that the collapsed Seljuk world could be taken apart piece by piece. But behind the scattered sultans stood a much more serious power. This was the Ayyubid Empire, founded by Saladin. It controlled Egypt, Syria, and a significant part of the Middle East. When the Georgian troops came too close to its sphere of influence, the reaction was harsh. The encounter took place near the fortress of Klat in Armenia. And here, for the first time in years of victories, Tamara had to retreat. The negotiations ended with concessions, the release of prisoners, the payment of a large sum, and the transfer of several fortresses. This was a blow to prestige. But what's important is that Tamara did not continue a suicidal war at any cost, just to maintain the image of invincibility. This truce lasted for decades, and this was already a sign of mature politics. Next, we'll discuss the creation of the Empire of Trebizond and Tamara's role in it. This was one of the most sophisticated geopolitical operations in the history of the medieval East. It combined personal revenge, loyalty to dynastic ties, and cold strategic calculation. And to understand how the Georgian banners ended up on the shores of the southern Black Sea, we need to go back several decades, into the dark corridors of the Byzantine palaces. The groundwork for expansion had been laid long before Tamara began her independent reign. The queen's own sister was married to a member of the great Byzantine Komnenos dynasty. In those times, the fate of rulers was extremely unstable, and when a bloody coup organized by the Angelos dynasty took place in Constantinople, the world of the Komnenos family collapsed. Tamara's sister's husband was blinded, which in those years was practically a death sentence, and his father, Emperor Andronikos, was subjected to agonizing torture and execution. In the epicenter of this chaos, Tamara's sister managed to escape from Byzantium to Georgia, taking her two young sons, Alexios and David, with her. These boys, Tamara's nephews, grew up in Georgia, and not just as honored guests, but as potential claimants to the Byzantine inheritance. Tamara personally oversaw their upbringing and education, understanding that she held a unique political tool in her hands, the legitimate heirs to the throne of the great empire. They were her sleeper agents, waiting for their time, and the opportunity to activate this plan arose at the beginning of the 13th century. As a patron of orthodoxy, Tamara regularly sent generous donations to monasteries throughout the Christian world. One of these shipments of gold was intended for the monks in Constantinople and on Mount Athos. However, the Byzantine Emperor Alexios III Angelos, who was constantly in need of money, simply confiscated this shipment. For Tamara, this was not just a financial loss, but a public challenge to her authority. This was the perfect casus belli, a reason for war that allowed her to act not just as an aggressor, but as a defender of justice. The moment for the strike was chosen with perfect precision. While in 1204 the Knights of the Fourth Crusade were besieging and plundering Constantinople, tearing the heart of Byzantium to pieces, Tamara gave the order to advance. While the world's attention was focused on the tragedy at the Bosphorus, Georgian troops swiftly entered the Byzantine provinces of Lazica and Chaldea. The local population, weary of taxes, welcomed Georgia's timely arrival in Byzantium. Byzantium emerged, which entered the war with Georgia in a timely manner. Byzantium emerged, which was joined by Georgia, returning to Georgia the Empire of Trebizond. This year, she became the head of the main part of the territory. Instead, she proclaimed the creation of a new state, the Empire of Trebizond. Her older nephew, Alexios Komnenos, took the title of Emperor and the title of Grand Komnenos. His brother David led the army of the new state. It looked like the restoration of the Byzantine dynasty's rule on the periphery of the former empire, but in reality, Trebizond became a strategic proxy state of Georgia. Tamara created a powerful buffer that protected her southwestern borders and ensured complete control over the most important trade routes in the Black Sea. This allowed Georgia to dictate its own terms in the region without burdening the treasury with the maintenance of huge garrisons in the new territories. The Empire of Trebizond became a vivid example of Tamara's soft power, as she turned a personal family tragedy into a geopolitical advantage. But maintaining a foreign empire was harder than building it. The neighboring powers soon realized this. The Turkish sultanates increased their pressure, and the Empire of Trebizond was reduced to a narrow strip of coastline, and soon became dependent on the same Muslim rulers it had recently fought against. Tamara's domestic policy was no less revolutionary. In an era when torture and executions were the norm, she effectively abolished the death penalty and corporal punishment. Her image, saintly and merciful, was not just a religious title, but a masterfully crafted PR persona that allowed her to maintain control over a confederation of 7 kingdoms. She knew when to be flexible and when to deliver a decisive blow. And now, let's shift our attention for a moment because the Golden Age is also about culture. And without culture, this era would not have become legendary. During Tamara's reign, monasteries and fortresses were built. The most impressive symbol of the era is Vardzia, a huge cave complex carved into the rock above the Kura River. And this is not just a monastery, it's a demonstration of the state's capabilities. Hundreds of rooms, secret passages, churches, and living halls. Stone turned into the architecture of power. At the court, poets, theologians, and scholars gather. The Georgian literary language is being formed. It is at this time that Shota Rustaveli writes The Knight in the Panther's Skin. The poem is dedicated to Tamara. Although this is a story about distant kingdoms, the real context is easily recognizable behind the allegories. In Rustaveli's work, the heroines rule on equal terms with men. Love there goes hand in hand with duty, and honor is valued above life. This is not just courtly lyricism, but the ideology of an era shaped into an artistic form. In general, even during Tamara's lifetime, an image was created of a just, wise, and almost saintly ruler. She is described as an ideal, intelligent, beautiful, and merciful. Even her political toughness is presented in the chronicles as a manifestation of supreme wisdom. But, like any golden age, this period was short-lived. And its ending turned out to be much quieter than its beginning. Around 1213, Tamara suddenly falls ill and dies. She was about 50. She was buried in secret. The chronicles say that the coffin was moved to the Gelati monastery. But no one knows the exact burial place. According to one version, the body was hidden so that enemies would not desecrate the grave. According to another, it was reburied in another place. There are even legends that her son transported her remains to Jerusalem. This is unusual because for a ruler of such scale, the disappearance of the grave is almost symbolic, as if the entire era vanished along with her. And with her departure, the Golden Age came to an end, which is very symbolic. Well, that's all from me. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. Всем пока.